I love that they named it after a place in Greece where the ancient Greeks used to call the umbilicus of the world. And soothsayers predicted the future based on inhaling hallucinogenic gases from an underground source. So, that in itself is a bizarre naming concept.
Oh, so that's what Delphi comes from.
Delphi is a place in Greece where the ancient Greeks thought the gods communicated with humans.
But they're all just high.
Yeah, literally.
Hello and welcome to Pulse, your podcast delving into all things health, innovation, digital and data. Proudly brought to you by Pulse IT News. This is our Hot Topics show. And I'm your host, Louise Shaper.
And I'm your other host, George Margellis.
George, what have you been up to lately?
Look, it's been a pretty busy couple of weeks. I've had the National Conference of Ageing Australia on the Gold Coast.
Yes, that was fun.
2,500 of my nearest and dearest aged care friends discussing the challenges of aged care. And we had a technology and innovation hub on the trade floor where we had a number of presentations. And shock horror, Louise, half of them, actually more, but probably 75% of them were about AI.
No, wasn't the chance.
Surprising, isn't it? And then on the Wednesday night, we had the dinner with a number of colleagues. There's big shifts happening in aged care. The AI is going to play a role. And then I've also had a virtual conference on Geron technology.
How was that? That was Hong Kong?
It was quite good with the Hong Kong Council of Social Service. I was surprised they had like 700 people online at one stage. For those who don't understand, Geron is Greek for old. So it's basically old people technology. Geron describes an old person. They're actually running a follow-up event in Hong Kong in November, which hopefully I'll be able to attend. It seems to be quite a sophisticated ecosystem of stuff happening over there. So we've been following up.
Okay, cool. Oh, well, I hope you get there in person then.
Yourself, what have you been up to, Louise?
Well, actually, I had a question for you. So I go to that dinner, which, guys, it was an evening with George Margellis. I got an invite. Anyway, and you did a great job, George.
It wasn't a dinner, it was a soiree.
Very, very fancy. So no, it was excellent. But I had a question for you because I've never heard this term used before. All throughout the night, people were referring to the people who receive aged care as participants. And people would say resident and then they'd correct themselves and say participant. What is going on? Like participant, that just seems like such an inhumane way of describing these people. Like, where did that term come from?
It actually came from the aged care consumer groups, actually. They were the ones who were complaining about us calling them clients or calling them residents or calling them patients. And they said, look, they wanted to be participants in their own care. So I guess it sort of fits in a bit with our good friends over in the US, the Society for Participatory Medicine. But yeah, it's hard to get a head around it. I mean, do you call them older people? Do you call them recipients of care? I mean, the idea is there should be a shared model of care, I guess. But we got our wrist slapped very early in the conference when someone went on stage at the same time as one of the consumers and used a different term. And they said, no, we're not consumers. We are participants.
All right. Well, I've been educated. I get when you're talking of yourself as a participant. Thank you for explaining the context. But when there isn't a participant in the room and, it just sounded very cold to me. I was just like very removed. But okay. But anyway, education for me.
It does demonstrate how important terminology is. I mean, people, the wrong word can just, set discussions off in a whole different path. And it's been an ongoing debate in the aged care community for many, many years now.
Well, a decision has been made and you've heard it not here first, but I've heard it here first. And George, I wanted to let you know a couple of things happened in the last week talking about Pulse Pod. So I was talking to someone really senior in the UK and mentioned the podcast. And I said, oh, well, you wouldn't have listened to it. And I went to explain what we talk about, what the show's about. And this person went, oh, no, I listen all the time. You've just come back from the Gold Coast, haven't you? And I was like,
there we go.
Cool. So there you go. And then in a separate conversation, talking to my sister who lives in rural Victoria, and she's a professional cleaner. So she cleans mostly people's homes and she's got one commercial client. But anyway, they're not usually there when she's cleaning their homes. It's school holidays, I guess. So she was telling me that she went to one of her clients' homes and the woman of the house was there and they were chatting and she works in healthcare. And Lisa said, oh, well, you might listen to my sister's podcast, and gave it a plug. And she went, what? Louise Shaper is your sister? I listen to her and George all the time.
There we go.
There you go. We've got listeners from all over the place.
It's interesting because I was on a call recently and the person started off the call saying, "Oh, George, I'm loving your podcast." I'm going, "Oh, yeah, the message is getting out there. That's good news."
It's not just our family members who are listening.
Exactly, yeah.
That's good.
My son tells me he listens to it on the way to and from work. He says it keeps him awake. I'm not sure whether that's good news or bad news.
All right. Well, I'll take it. All right. Shall we get into our hot topics?
Let's jump in.
Well, long-term listeners of Pulse may remember a story we covered in our very first episode back in June 2024. It was about the NHS's plans to open an AI-run physiotherapy clinic in an effort to cut waiting times. Well, the technology that powers that clinic is Flock Health, a Cambridge-based AI physiotherapy startup, and they are our first hot topic today because they have just secured Class 2A medical device clearance under EU medical device regulations. Now, this clearance means that it is approved to not just triage or assist, but to make diagnostic decisions and deliver a full end-to-end care pathway. So we're talking assessment, treatment, discharge, all without human supervision. Yes, no human in the loop. So, George, I figure we need to unpack this. Europe is known for having incredibly strict AI regulation, and yet they've just allowed an AI system to own the care pathway. So that leap from AI that supports clinicians to AI that decides is really profound. So what do you think that tells us about where AI in healthcare is headed?
It is very exciting news, I have to admit. And Flock Health is a very interesting idea. I came up with an acronym, Software as a Health Service. I mean, that may well be, this is the first example of that actually happening. It is very targeted. We need to keep in mind that this is not a general health service. This is only managing people with back pain at the moment, but that in itself is a major health issue and does have significant morbidity associated. The pilot study did show it decreased waiting times, which is a good thing. We know that waiting times for many services are a problem. And they provide care via a virtual video. And I quote their website here. Each appointment is like a 30-minute video call, except our side of the call is created by our AI engine in real time, just for you. You can ask questions and your digital physio will respond to you live in a continuously generated personal video stream. Sounds pretty impressive. I do ask the question of whether generating personalized AI videos for each individual is the most effective use of AI, because we know video generation requires quite a bit of AI grunt, and there's a lot of discussion now.
Yeah, there's a few lakes being drained.
Exactly. A few coal-powered electricity plants still being used there. So we need to think of whether that's the best use of AI. Back in my day, physios used to give you a bunch of photocopied sheets of exercises with stick figures. And if this is doing basically that, giving you the same exercises, but using high definition generated video, is that a good thing? Well, on the one hand, from a patient acceptance perspective, it probably is. I have to be honest, that I have a whole bunch of those photocopy sheets sitting in the bottom of a drawer somewhere that I never use. So that may well be a better way of doing it. But again, I think the key here is we need to continue to evaluate it and fine tune it. But kudos to the people at Flock for developing the solution. It solves a problem. And we do know that waiting lists in the UK, as they are here in Australia, are a major issue.
And in Europe, I mean, it's everywhere. So when we talked about it, almost 18 months ago now, there was a trial done within the NHS of 1,000 patients, and 100% of them thought the experience was equivalent to seeing a human physio, and 57% of the patients for that trial thought the AI experience was better because it was personalised. And I was having a look at this because we've talked about it before, the EU regulation is really strict, and the level of evidence that they would have had to produce to get that certification is actually quite high. And the thing that blows my mind, our natural instinct is a profession like physio is very hands-on. Like, you expect somebody to literally place their hands on you and then give you the homework to do at home with stretches and exercises. So the idea that you actually don't need to see a physical human and have physical touch for these range of conditions, that blows my mind. Like, when I studied OT, we had a lot of classes with the physios. There is no way in hell anyone would have thought that part of our job was replaceable by an AI. I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, I think we just need to look at equity, make sure people have access to these things, and not being able to afford to see a physio or just not having enough physios around because it's ongoing workforce issues. If this can actually rectify that, that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Look, kudos to Flock for going through the process of getting that regulatory approval. And the fact that it's been regulated means that it's been tested to be safe. They've picked a very specific use case. Generally, most lower back pain, unless there's some red flag symptoms, is not life-threatening, but it is very life-limiting. So the fact that they can deliver that service quicker rather than 12 to 18 weeks waiting period to see a physio just demonstrates that we need to think about the whole care service. I'm sure there are some very specific things that physios have to do hands-on.
Oh, yes, yes.
So we're not replacing physios.
Yeah, we were not saying don't study physios. You will always have a job.
Again, when we look in aged care, there's a huge shortage of physios who provide geriatric care, and there's some real hands-on stuff they need to do in that space. So if we can take the people who are delivering primary care physio for back pain and push them into the sector where that'll add greater value, I think there's real opportunities here. My only concern is that we start getting fragmented services. So your back gets managed by the physio virtually. But if you also have a knee problem, then that's a different physio service. And if you actually have a neck problem, does that go to a different physio service? And no one sort of puts it all together and says, oh, actually, this person actually has a systemic problem that we can probably solve with other things. So I'm a bit concerned that we're super specializing virtual services so that we don't get holistic care. But if there's a general practitioner overlooking the whole service, that may solve that problem. We talked about the acceptance. I mean, the question, of course, is that if you target this at the tech population, then they're going to love it. What does this mean for the 85-year-old grandmother at home with lower back pain who has a TV from the 1970s and doesn't have internet connection? What happens there? So we need to think about those equity issues. But overall, we're watching it with great interest and looking to see what new use cases pop up that we can leverage as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. All right, well, now we're going to move over to Canada, where the frontier of remote surgery just got real. A medtech startup called Remedy Robotics has pulled off what they say is the world's first fully remote neurointerventional procedure. Basically, the system combines robotic hardware and AI-enabled software to allow remote surgery. Yes, surgery without a surgeon in the same room as the patient. Use of this AI robot potentially means people who may have either died or suffered significant injury from cardiovascular emergencies, things like stroke, heart attack, or even internal bleeding, can actually be treated even if a specialist surgeon isn't in close proximity. Now, Josh, I love this idea that the patient is in an operating room theatre surrounded by clinicians, but none of them are surgeons. So there would be, an anaesthetist, nurses, a radiographer, but also a biomedical engineer to manage that connectivity, latency, hardware troubleshooting. This just feels like something out of Star Trek.
It is pretty cool. And I have to say, first off, what a great name, Remedy Robotics. Now, endovascular surgery is really fiddly stuff. We're talking about surgery inside blood vessels where strokes occur. That's a pretty small space, and it's surrounded by some fairly delicate structures. And they use a combination of robotics and AI, machine learning. It isn't totally autonomous. There is still a surgeon somewhere in the picture, but they're not necessarily in the room, which is good because when you think about it, these sort of interventions have been shown to have significant improved outcomes compared to the classic clot-busting drugs and things we've used previously. And I've actually had a bit of personal experience. A very good friend of mine had a occlusive stroke a year or two ago. Now, in Sydney, there's one place that does this sort of surgery. It's only available on certain days because there's only literally one or two surgeons in the whole state who do it. He was very fortunate. He got rushed off to that hospital, had the clot physically removed through endovascular surgery, and his outcomes have been great. Had he not had that, I expect he would have had significantly worse outcomes if he would have still been alive. So stroke affects people at the prime of their life and can cause real challenges. So the fact that we have this technology available is great.
So they've done it in Canada, but it's not commercial yet.
But the reality is there are very few neurovascular endothelial surgeons around. We have seen robotic surgery in other areas. There's the famous Da Vinci robot, which gets used a lot. And discussion around those has been sort of mixed. Some people think it's great and some people think, well, it just does what a surgeon does.
You need to be in the room, though, the surgeon?
So the surgeon sort of controls it from the device. So it's sort of remote, but not worked on models to make it remote. Look, it does raise big questions around latency or whatever, because if you're bouncing this off a geosynchronous satellite, the surgeon needs to be on hand. The other thing, of course, is we need to have better tools to diagnose occlusive strokes as well. I was reading recently of someone working on a mobile CT machine, which you basically stick on people's heads and look for clots on the spot, because the biggest challenge at the moment is that ambulance turns up, they need to work out where to take them. The clot busting drugs are effective, but they have significant side effects. So there's a whole bunch of different challenges. Again, good news story. Hopefully it pans out, becomes available to more facilities. I'm sure it wouldn't be a cheap piece of technology, so it needs to be put into budgets. But if we can show the benefits of improved stroke outcomes, great news.
And all we need is that infrastructure support, regulation, training, the capital investment, especially for a country's geography like Australia, that hub and spoke model. So we've got major centres hosting the robots, and then local hospitals host the patients and the labs. It could be really interesting. So I'm sure we'll be back onto this topic in a future episode.
But this is one of those classic examples of where high speed, low latency internet connections make a difference. Remember years ago when we were having the debate about whether Australia needed a national broadband network, and everyone sort of said, why would you need more than 56K anyway? Who needs fibre to the home? Well, that's all rubbish. And I remember being in many of those discussions. Well, the reality, this is one of those classic examples. If you have a high speed dedicated network for these sort of situations, you can literally save lives.
Yeah, that's right. Well, time for a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about the movement putting patients in charge of their own care, the NHS's so-called online hospital, no wards or walls, and the AI models that claim to predict your medical future, even decades ahead. Stay with us. George, friend of the pod, Danny Sands and e-patient Dave are some of the leaders behind the Society for Participatory Medicine, an organisation spearheading a movement of patients and clinicians working in genuine partnership. Now, we have both supported the Society for a really long time, and a while back there, we tried to even stand up a chapter in Australia, George, didn't we?
Our timing was great, wasn't it? Wasn't it early 2020 when we sort of started doing this?
Yeah. Yes. So anyway, you and I were interested.
Beaten by a virus.
Yes. Well, the Society believes that the future of healthcare should centre on collaborative participatory medicine, where patients are not passive recipients, but active partners in their own care. Well, a new initiative from the Society argues that it's time to move from cheerleading for this future to evidence. And they're proposing to set up something called CHAMP, a collaborative healthcare action measurement platform to build an evidence base. We're talking quantifying collaborative activity, setting targets to increase adoption of participatory practices, building an evidence base to research how collaboration relates to outcomes, and of course, co-producing research with patients. Now, I want to amplify this endeavour here on the pod because the Society is calling for patients, carers, clinicians, organisations to get involved in CHAMP's development. George, is this what's needed for insurers and policymakers to see participatory medicine not as like a nice to have, but as an efficiency and safety tool?
Well, as you pointed out, Louise, we are big fans of the Society, and a big shout out to Danny and Dave and the various people over there. It's originally started in Boston, but now a global organization. I think this is really important. I mean, we've always had the feel-good perspective that participatory medicine being a good thing to have. We have lots of anecdotal examples of how it's had good outcomes and good experiences. And we've got a vibrant group of people who support it. But evidence speaks louder than anecdotes in medicine. It's interesting. We had a discussion earlier about the words participants in aged care. Collaborative healthcare action measurement platform. Great concept. How do we measure these sort of things in an objective way? Subjectively, we've got great examples. Objectively, we need to show data that shows improvements in efficiency, improvements in safety, because these are the metrics that we use to seek further funding. Participatory medicine in and of itself isn't an expensive exercise. It is a cultural change in the system requiring us to engage with participants or consumers, or again, terminology can drive us insane in this space. But the reality is if we have evidence that it makes a difference to the outcomes, then it's harder for payers to refuse to pay for the extra expense associated with delivering it. You can't do participatory medicine in a 5-minute consult. That requires you to have conversations.
Relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the big challenges we have in primary care, but also in secondary care here, in that all our care models tend to be very transactional. And we're starting to see even a greater shift to those transactional models. So a lot of these specialized online services become transactional models, not relationship models. So understanding what the value of that relationship is. And, we've been saying for years, the relationship's a great thing, but we need evidence, and the evidence generation in this space is hard. But the first stage of that is to set up a measurement platform and refine what the measurement parameters are, who needs to be involved in the discussions, get the insurers and the providers and the regulators and the government all engaged early in that discussion to define what this means.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll put a link to it in the show notes. If these topics are of interest to you, no matter where you are, please do reach out to the Society, because if we have an evidence base, it'll actually make the change for business model change easier to get it across the line and really transformative for patients. And to be honest, it's a better experience for clinicians too.
Absolutely. When you speak to junior medical officers or people applying to go to university to do medicine, they always talk about this desire to be actively engaged in healthcare with their patients. But the reality is, once you get into the system, the transactional mode of care overtakes that desire. And so we need to bring back the compassion and the participation into the whole healthcare system.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're going to move over to England, where the NHS is preparing to launch what the government is calling a bold new model of care. Beginning in 2027, there will be an online hospital. No bricks, no wards, just digital access to specialists across the country, and they're calling it NHS Online. Now, I think I've mentioned before on the pod that my very first job in digital health was as a research assistant evaluating the rollout of telehealth in Western Australia. Back in those days, there were no smartphones. So it's fair to say I've been a fan of telehealth forever, but it's 2025 and I think bold may be pushing it as a descriptor for a telehealth service that won't even launch until 2027. So we've been talking about language today on the pod, George, and I get that the language of bold new model is clearly designed to inspire confidence in NHS innovation. And I do congratulate them for going down this path. But, public trust depends on delivery, and too often our messaging in digital health of digital transformation often outpaces implementation. What are your thoughts on this one, George?
Well, I mean, the old online hospital announcement. I don't know if you were a fan of the old Get Smart show, but I remember Maxwell Smart used to say, yes, third time I fell for it this year. And seriously, the term online hospital is a fairly overused cliche for what is really, in this respect, it's effectively an automated referral system. It's not a hospital in the true sense. So we need to make sure we don't confuse people thinking that this replaces the brick and mortar building down the road. This is not a physical hospital replacement. This is a model of care replacement where we basically triage in real time virtually and get people to the right place. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's not what we think of as hospitals. Again, terminology becomes a challenge here. But having said that, it's not a bad idea. I mean, we know there are issues with getting people to the right place at the right time to see the right person. If all it is a fancy appointment making system for an already burnt out group of doctors and other providers, I'm not sure that's a great solution. It just means we're just sending more people to the same people who are already struggling to provide care and getting rid of their front office desk staff and replacing that with a rostering computer.
Yeah, because they said there is going to be that integration, isn't it? So it'll triage you through the NHS app, and then you'll go to community diagnostic centres for any imaging or tests you need. But isn't it also going to have a video consultation component too, like to actually do the triage?
And that's something I guess we need to see. And who does that video consult? Is it an AI-generated video consult like the people at Flock are doing? Again, the devil's in the details. The idea that sort of work, which is previously done by your local GP, is being replaced by this service. What are the negative consequences of that? Does that mean the local GP won't be in the loop, or just refer you back to your local GP? And the big challenge here, of course, is that we're not attracting clinicians to take on the role of general practice. We're not reimbursing them sufficiently for them to take on the role. But, let's be honest, a couple of years ago, this is what Babylon promised to do, and we all know how that ended up. So maybe the old cynic in me, hopefully it does play a better role. Having gone through the process of trying to make appointments for people with multiple issues, it is challenging. So if we can make that process more efficient, that's great. As long as it doesn't drop out the humanity of the care. Back to our original story around participatory medicine, a participatory general practitioner who has the tools at their disposal may be the right way to do this. And I'm not quite sure automating it is necessarily the best solution.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see. And there was another telehealth related news this week from Australia, which is the Medical Board of Australia have actually come out with new guidance. They've now requiring prescriptions to actually come from a treating doctor after a clinically appropriate telehealth or in-person consultation. So basically, the services that have popped up recent years, especially since COVID, where you can have an online questionnaire and get a prescription, that's not allowed anymore. So there is a maturation there. But at the same time, we've talked about it before, people gravitate to those things because the traditional system, they get lost in it. It's hard to navigate. Or even if they're not lost, they're just waiting forever to get an appointment. So, of course, if someone says, hey, you can have a 10-minute, 5-minute consultation, answer this online questionnaire, and all your dreams will come true, you can see why people will gravitate towards that.
And you often have to ask is sometimes these medical board decisions, are they designed to protect the consumer or protect the medical industry? So there are those challenges there.
Well, their job is to protect clinicians, even if they like, that is their job.
But like I said, the problem is that for the bulk of people, sometimes these tools work well, but then you get the end user cases where someone has a significant problem, or they have multiple problems, or they have mental health issues on top of their physical issues, and these tools aren't designed to cover that. But there's also the discussion about if you then take away all the bread and butter or the easier cases from clinicians and just make them spend their whole day on complex, complicated cases that have low return on investment because you have to put in extra time. I know many clinicians who go home stressed out because they've had complex cases, and the consequences of those cases are still on their mind at 2:00 in the morning when they're lying in bed thinking about, did I do the right thing? You really need to balance that. You can't just expect that clinicians will be doing life-saving procedures 24/7.
Oh, yeah. No, I was literally out for dinner in recent weeks with a group of clinicians, and they were saying how, like these companies come in and pitch to them, oh, it'll be great because we'll take all of that boring stuff off you and you can just do the hard, complex stuff. And they're like, no, I'm already burnt out at the end of my shift. While I do want to be intellectually challenged at work, I don't want to be constantly intellectually challenged. It'd be nice for someone who just comes in and just needs a prescription or, they've kicked their toe and they don't know whether it's broken or not. Like, you need to break up your day. Yeah, you're right. Clinicians do not want, the majority of them, just to have hard, complex cases. And like you said, not reimbursed for that level of complexity either.
And that's the key thing. I mean, the message that we hear when they come and tell us that is that we'll take away all your cash earning business and leave you with the cash losing business. What a great business model that is for you.
Great pitch. Don't know why more people don't buy into that.
I'm going to become very rich, but you're going to be very poor.
George, I think we need to build like an AI agent that companies can put their pitch deck through and get advice from you, where you can be the cynical take on their business model.
The grumpy old Dr. AI model.
No, it's good. And of course, you're right. You are absolutely right. All right. Well, in our final hot topic today, we are bookending with AI. Published in Nature, a team of researchers from the UK and Europe have unveiled a modified large language model called Delphi 2M that can analyse a person's medical records and lifestyle data to estimate their risk for more than 1,000 diseases up to 20 years into the future. Now, this model doesn't just look at medical history. It's trained on millions of anonymised health records, and it can synthesize the interactions between behaviors, biomarkers, and comorbidities to make long-range predictions. The researchers say that Delphi 2M outperformed traditional risk calculators across most conditions from diabetes to dementia, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. Meanwhile, at Massachusetts General Hospital, a different approach has just been published in GigaScience, a framework called Ethos. Now, Ethos doesn't just predict risk, it creates what the authors call health timelines, adaptive, explainable forecasts that can update as new data arrives. The team says it's been validated across multiple real-world hospital data sets and is designed to deal with messy, incomplete information, the kind that real clinicians actually work with. So on one hand, we have AI that claims to see 20 years into your medical future future. On the other, AI that accepts the chaos of real healthcare data but still makes sense of it. Which leads me to the obvious question. Would you want to know what your 2045 health report card looks like and who should have access to that prediction? So, George, we're going to get personal here. Would you want to know when you're going to die?
Simple answer. I think it's an interesting discussion point. And whilst it talks about the accuracy, I mean, it says it was very good at predicting impending death. But if the data feeding into impending death is, oh, the patient's been in ICU for 3 weeks and their kidneys, liver, and lungs are shut down, what do you predict? I don't think you really need an AI tool.
Oh, no. Well, this is more complicated, and it has been published in reputable scientific journals.
And I have to say, look, I spent quite a bit of time on these 2 papers. They did make for some heavy reading.
You'd love them.
Oh, it was great. I mean, my wife was quite annoyed that I was up in bed reading these papers at midnight, 1:00 in the morning.
Oh, sorry, Marina. My fault.
And the fact that the first paper got into Nature, I mean, Nature is like the nirvana of scientific publications. The next step after Nature is a Nobel Prize. So let's be honest, this has been through some serious peer review. The first thing about the first paper I did love. I love that they named it after a place in Greece where the ancient Greeks used to call the umbilicus of the world. And soothsayers predicted the future based on inhaling hallucinogenic gases from an underground source. So that in itself is a bizarre naming concept.
Oh, so that's what Delphi comes from.
Delphi is a place in Greece where the ancient Greeks thought the gods communicated with humans.
But they're all just high.
Yeah, literally. I mean, they discovered that underneath there was fissure that caused hallucinogenic gases to raise up, and have these women sitting there who would answer questions in very vague terms. The classic example is that they talk about how during the Peloponnesian Wars, the Athenians went to the Oracle of Delphi and asked how they were going to protect themselves from the invasion of the Persians. And the answer was, you'll be saved by a wooden wall. Now, everyone thought, okay, we're going to go build a wooden wall. But what actually happened, Athens was saved by their navy, which was made out of wood. So depending on how you extrapolate these answers, if your answer is vague enough, it's always going to be right. So if the answer here is that, are you going to die? The answer is yes. Well, sooner or later, that answer will be right. Are you 40 kilos overweight, have high cholesterol? Well, chances are you will have a heart attack. Chances are you will be right. These are sort of things that are published in Harrison's textbook of medicine.
Well, hang on. You read the papers at that huge level of detail, which I did not. Was there anything about the postcode where you live? Because isn't that the biggest predictor?
Well, interesting. And they did comment on, and especially the second paper was actually more about the fact they use social data as well. So there's a whole bunch of things that predict, whilst they claim to be more accurate than most risk detection tools now, when you look at the metrics they were using, they focus on this concept of area under the curve, which is an AI-specific metric which doesn't necessarily translate back to clinical utility. In clinical utility, we talk about sensitivity and specificity, and there was no discussion about how useful these tools were from that perspective in the first paper. The second paper did go into that in a bit more detail. The first paper was very much focused on the development of what they call a GPT for disease type model, using the same sort of methodology as ChatGPT, but using health data rather than text data. A really interesting concept in itself. They had a big data bank of 400,000 UK biobank participants who have a really big data bank about them. They capture things from blood test results, social medical records, genomic results, proteomic results.
And we've talked about the biobank before on the show, and I'm sure we will in the future because of all that data.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, it provides a great source. And again, if you capture all that information and have the equivalent information available for your patients, it may well provide you with a pathway. They were fairly vague when they said they provided you the pathway, how specific it was. What is the benefit of knowing that you're going to die of heart disease in 20 years' time? We already tell people to exercise more, eat better, do all the things that prevent that.
Yeah, but when it's generic, George, see, that's where I think the difference is. So we all know, don't smoke, exercise more. I know this stuff, I'm a proponent of it. And yet I haven't done any exercise this week. And I know that's really bad, but I've just been spending too much time in front of my computer. But having personalized, like it's looked at my data, my patterns and my behaviors, And I've talked about it before, because I know that I'm at risk of dementia, I did make lifestyle changes, which I haven't done well this week. But because it seems more personalized, it's changed the way I do things. And I've been thinking about this, especially because, as you know, I lost my dad recently, and he was given a 6-month sentence that you probably won't be here in 6 months. And it was 18 months later when he died. And as I've talked about before, considering he had cancer, he had a relatively good health span during that journey. You know, he wasn't sick in a hospital bed, not at all. So I was reflecting on, would I want to know? And with what level of specificity? And I've been asking people this. It's a whole philosophical thing, I guess. But I reckon I wouldn't want to know the day I was going to die. But if I was given a window, because at the moment I'm expecting to live for another 30 years, easy, probably 40 years. If I know I've only got 10 years left or 2 years, I'm going to make different choices today. And the things that I stress about now, I'm going to be like, well, why? That's a 20-year future problem. I'm not going to be here. So I will probably make different choices and maybe stress less and enjoy life a bit more. I don't know. It's so fascinating.
It's interesting. Now, I mean, actuarial tables do exactly that. They will tell you what your risk of dying is in the next year at a statistical level, not necessarily personal level. But again, knowing your health history and your background, a good clinician should be able to have those sort of discussions, which is why I found the second paper more interesting, because they talked about using explainable concepts, understanding why this predicts you're going to die in 5 years' time. And as a result.
Yes, and it modifies over time as well.
Exactly. And that means, what can I do to prevent that? And again, we know that the reality is, if you look at actuarial data, if you manage to live to 50, then the chances are pretty high that you'll live to 80. I'm just concerned that when they say they predict outcomes, they're like the oracles of Delphi. They do it in a fairly vague way. You will have a higher risk of congestive heart failure as you get older. Well, everybody has a higher risk of congestive heart failure as you get older, because age is one of the highest risk factors for most disease processes. You can usually predict people's health journeys, but then surprises come along. You can't necessarily predict cancer. We've seen an increase in cancer rates in younger people for colorectal cancer, which previously used to be a disease of aging. So there's all those confounders that come into place. And to quote the famous term, sometimes shit just happens and people get strange diseases out of the blue. I was really impressed with the second paper, which took it to the next step of how do we build it into clinical pathways so we can actually use the information in near real time to improve outcomes. Their paper is still very early. People like David Bates and the team there are great at then taking to the next step. So I will be following that paper with huge interest. And I think that would be a great discussion topic going forward.
Yeah, we should have David Bates and an actuary on the show.
Absolutely, having that discussion. But the first paper did generate some great headlines. AI can predict when you're going to die. Well, no, AI can predict that you are going to die, but so can, I'm pretty sure Adam and Eve predicted we were all going to die as well. Just because it does something doesn't mean it adds value. And I'd also rename it as something other than Delphi and move away from that vagueness, because whilst the oracles of Delphi are famous in ancient history, I wouldn't be using them as my prime example of how I want to predict my death in the future.
Yeah. And I think we need to come up with different marketing slogans for this podcast, George, because you always teach me and our listeners, there's a big aspect of Greek history here in almost every episode.
So if anyone has ever seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, as the Mr. Potokoglu used to say, every word is Greek. All you need to do is look at it close enough. So
yeah, lovely. All right, cool. Well, thanks. I've always learned stuff from you, George. And that's really interesting stuff. And it won't be the last time we talk about AI prediction models on the show. But that is a wrap for our hot topics today.
It's been an interesting discussion. And like I said, our upcoming interview with some people around these topics, I think will make for great listening as well. So make sure you listen for what's our name of our other podcast?
Pulse Amplify.
Pulse Amplify. Thank you, Louise. And I hope people are enjoying our new format of having our hot topics separated from our interviews, and really keen to get your feedback or what you think about that.
Yeah, and let's just plug the next one we've got coming up. We recorded it the other day for our Pulse Amplify series, another interview with a book author. And I haven't edited it yet, George, and I'm thinking the audio engineer might have struggles, because We just laughed so much during that interview. I had a great time.
Well, that was the most fun interview. I hadn't met Joe before that interview. We had so much fun. That was a real fun interview. It's funny, actually. I had the family, we were outside, we were having dinner at home till that night, and they came back and go, I thought you were working on your podcast. I'm going, yeah, it's a long story, because I was killing laughing.
All right. George, between now and then, you and I are going to Perth. And actually, when this episode launches in people's ears, we would have just come back from Perth. So we are going to hang out at the Royal Australian College of Medical Administrators in Perth.
They actually have a digital health stream going throughout their whole conference, and medical administrators play a significant role in managing our healthcare system. So I think this is a great incentive from their perspective to actually have people like Louise and I and our good friend Chris Longhurst and Monica Trujillo and a whole bunch of others.
It's like, is there anyone in Digital Health Legends who aren't going to be in Perth, I think? Like Frances Lee has just done such an amazing job of pulling together all these speakers across 4 days.
And I have to commend them because, they've made it possible for these speakers to get this. These guys have been very helpful in facilitating this discussion. So hopefully we'll have some great discussion items coming out of this conference and potentially some interesting discussions for our podcast in the future.
Yeah. And you mentioned our friend Chris Longhurst, friend of the pod and friend of George and of mine. And let's just give a quick shout out to Chris because he's just got a new job. I'm so excited for him. If you haven't heard that episode, if you're a new listener to Pulse, go back and check out our interview with Chris last year. He's amazing, guys, super smart, lovely man, dedicated his life to improving outcomes for sick kids, but with a very strong health informatics and academic bent. And he's now going to be the CEO of the Seattle Children's Hospital. So cool.
And for those who aren't aware of the hierarchy of hospitals in the world, Seattle Children's Hospital is the pinnacle of pediatric care. So this is the place we refer to, same way we often refer to Mayo and Hopkins as, the pinnacles of care. Seattle Children's is the pinnacle of pediatric care. So the fact that Chris got that role signifies how awesome Chris is, but how important they must think that digital health is to bring in one of the US's greatest proponents of digital health to run the whole institution. So congratulations, Chris. Congratulations, Seattle Children's Hospital. Knowing it's in the hands of Chris Longhurst is a blessing for many people. And let's be honest, American healthcare can do with some good news at the moment.
Well said, George. Okay, well, until next time, George, if you could please read us out.
So thank you for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse IT News. Pulse is produced by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions, and thanks to Emily Mara for her great support in helping us provide this podcast. Big thanks to everyone for listening. Make sure you subscribe, follow, and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Also, don't forget to tell your friends about us. And don't forget, you can visit pulseit.news to sign up for the e-newsletter and explore Pulse IT's massive digital archive. Send any feedback or topic suggestions to pulsepod@pulseit.news. We love to hear what's on your mind. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.